Good evening. My name is Peter Nyangesa. I will be taking you company law for today. So the topic is company law. Okay, we shall start afresh. The first topic is called nature and classification of companies. Nature and classification of companies. The first topic is called nature and classification of companies. Okay, we shall start by defining what the term company law. The definition of company law. The definition of company law. Last week, for those who are in class, we said company law is a study of rules. Company law is a study of rules and principles that governs and regulates the affairs of a company stroke a corporation. We said company law, it is a study of the rules and principles that governs and regulates the affairs of a company stroke corporation. The affairs of a company or a corporation. We have said company law, it is a study of the rules and principles that governs and regulates the affairs of a company stroke a corporation. If you are writing, please. Okay, let us go to types of companies. Types of companies. We have 5 broad categories of companies. Number 1, we have chartered corporations. Chartered corporations. Number 1 is chartered corporations. Number 2, we have statutory corporations. Statutory corporations. Statutory corporations. Then number 3, we have registered companies. Registered companies. Apart from this, we also have holding and subsidiary companies. Holding and subsidiary companies. Then apart from holding and subsidiary companies, we have foreign companies. Foreign companies. Foreign companies. Under statutory corporation, we have said we have 5 broad categories of companies. We have chartered corporations, we have statutory corporations, registered companies, holding and subsidiary companies, and foreign companies. Under registered companies, we have 2 broad categories of registered companies. So under registered companies, we have public companies, shares. So under limited companies, we have those who are limited by shares and those who are limited by guarantee. So under limited companies, we have those who are limited by shares. We have those who are limited by shares and those who are limited by guarantee. So under limited companies, you have those who are limited by shares and those who are limited by guarantee. Then under private companies, we also have unlimited companies and limited companies. So under private, we can classify them into two. We have those who are unlimited companies, and limited companies. Okay, those are 5 broad categories of companies. We have said we have 5 broad categories of companies. We have chartered corporations, then statutory corporations. We have registered companies, holding companies, and foreign companies. Under registered companies, we have 2 broad categories. We have those who are public and those who are private. That is public companies and private companies. Under public companies, we have unlimited companies and limited companies. And limited companies, a company can be limited by guarantee or it can be limited by shares. Yeah. Those who are writing, please do hurry. We proceed. Are you through? Huh? Yes. Okay, let us start by the first type of company, that is chartered corporations. So write number 1, chartered corporations. Okay, let us see what are chartered corporations. These are corporations created by a charter that is granted by the president. So a chartered company or a chartered corporation, this is a corporation that is created by a charter that is granted by the president. In Kenya, it is only the president who can give a charter. And in Kenya, only private universities that is created by the charter. Sawa. Okay, write and say, these are corporations. These are corporations. These are corporations. These are corporations created by a charter. Created by a charter that is granted. That is granted by the president. These are corporations created by a charter that is granted by the president. The second point, only private universities are created through, in Kenya, only private universities are created are created through a charter. It is only private universities that is created through a charter. This is the law in Kenya. Okay, let us see. Let us see the next point. The charter must set out the name. The charter must set out the name. The charter must set out the name, membership, and also the powers, and also the powers, and functions of the universities, and also the powers and functions of the universities. Okay, we have said in Kenya it is only private universities that is created through a charter. So what are the examples of private universities in Kenya? So e.g. Mount Kenya University. E.g. Mount Kenya University. We have Kabaraka University, etc. Okay, let us go to the second type of company, that is statutory corporations. Statutory corporations. This is the second type of a company. As the name suggests, statutory corporation, it comes, the word statutory, it comes from the word statute, means act of parliament. So these are companies or corporations that are created through an act of parliament. Right, and say they are created by an act of parliament or an order of the president, in accordance with the State Corporations Act. So we have said statutory corporations, they are created by an act of parliament or an order of the president in accordance with the State Corporations Act. Even if the president, okay, we have said the president can create these companies, but he must follow the Corporations Act. Sawa. Okay. Okay. Statutory corporations, these are government corporations. The second point, these are government corporations. These are government corporations, especially parastatals. These are government corporations, especially parastatals. number three, the point number three, the act creating the corporations, the act creating the corporations, the act creating the corporation gives its name, gives it a name, it gives it a name, management structure, it gives it a name, management structure, and also prescribes, the objective, prescribes the objective of the company. Okay, we have said statutory corporations. These are corporations that are created by an act of parliament or an order of the president in accordance with the State Corporations Act. And we have also said these are government corporations, especially parastatals. Then the act creating the corporations, it gives it a name, management structure, and also prescribes the objective of the company or a corporations. So what are these examples of, what are the examples of these corporations? So say i.e., what are the examples of these corporations? What are examples? Yeah? We have Kenya Power, Absa Bank. We have Kasneb. So examples of these corporations, we have Kenya Pipeline, Kasneb, even NEC, Sindio. NEC PI is one of the corporations. Then we have NCSEV, NHIF, etc. Are you done? Great. Okay, let us go to the third type of a company, that is registered corporations. Number three, we have registered corporations. Registered corporations. What are registered corporations? Are created in accordance with the provisions of the Companies Act. We have said chartered companies, they are created by, or they are created by a charter that is granted by the president. Then statutory companies, they are created by an act of parliament. So statutory companies are created by an act of parliament. Then registered companies, they are created in accordance with the provisions of Companies Act. So let us write and say, are created in accordance with the provisions of Companies Act. So a registered corporation is created with the provisions of Companies Act. Then the second point, certain documents must be delivered to the Registrar of Companies for registration, i.e. Memorandum of Association and Articles of Association. Certain documents must be delivered must be delivered to the registrar, of companies, for registration, i.e., you must deliver memorandum of association, and articles of association. Okay. Let us see the examples of these corporations or companies. Okay, we have two broad categories of registered companies, as we said. Examples include, we have public and private companies. We have public and private companies. We have said we have two broad categories of examples of registered corporations. We have said we have public and private companies. So let us see what are public companies and what are private companies. Let us see what are public. What is a public company? Write and say, this is a company with the following features. A public company is a company with the following features. A public company is a company with the following features. Number one, must have a minimum of 7 members. Must have a minimum of 7 members. It must have a minimum of 7 members and no maximum. A public company, it must have a minimum of 7 members and no maximum. Then number 2, must have at least 2 directors. A public company must have at least 2 directors. It must have at least 2 directors. Then number 3, its shares must be freely transferable. Its shares must be freely transferable. Its shares must be freely transferable. It means any member of the public can buy its shares. Its shares is not restricted to only the members of the company. Then number 4, it must have a statutory meeting. It must have a statutory meeting. What are these examples of a statutory meeting? In a company, we have several types of meetings. We have AGM, directors meeting, etc. So, i.e., it must have a statutory meeting, i.e., first AGM, within 3 months, first AGM within 3 months of formation. Within 3 months of formation for companies that were created before 2015. So those companies that were created before 2015, it was mandatory that they must hold an AGM. AGM in full is annual general meeting. They must hold an AGM within 3 months of its formation. Then number 5, the 5th feature of these companies, they must publish annual accounts. Must publish annual accounts. They must publish annual accounts. Then number 6, it must have a company secretary. 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 Number 7, after acquiring certificate of incorporation, after acquiring the certificate of incorporation, it must go ahead and acquire the certificate of trading. It must go ahead and acquire the certificate of trading to commence the business. Trading to commence the business. So public companies, it must acquire 2 certificates before it starts its operations. First, it must acquire the certificate of incorporation. Then number 2, it must go ahead and acquire the certificate of trading before it commences the business. Right? NB. A public company is required. A public company is required to include at the end of its name, the words public limited company. Public limited company. In short, you can say PLC. E.g. Safaricom public limited company. So all public limited companies, they must include at the end of its name the word public limited company to show that they are public companies. Okay. Any question? Are you through? So let us proceed. We said we have two broad categories of registered companies. We have public companies and private companies. So a public company is a company that has these 7 features. And at the end of its name, it must include the word public limited company. Okay, let us see what are private companies. So write and say private company. A private company. A private company, write and say a private company. A private company. A private company is a company. Is a company with the following features. A private company is a company with the following features. Number one, members are minimum of 1. Members are minimum of 1. Members are minimum of 1 and maximum of 50 and maximum of 50 and the maximum of 50 persons. The maximum of 50 persons, excluding employees. Excluding employees, meaning even one single person, he or she can form a company. Najua chenye unauliza. Minimum of 1, correct? Yes. Yes. 2 ni directors. Yeah. Okay, a private company, number 1 feature, the members are a minimum of 1 and maximum of 50. Number two, it requires at least 1 director. Number 2, it requires at least 1 director. It requires at least 1 director. Number 3 restricts the right to transfer its shares. Restricts the right to transfer its shares. We said in public companies, the shares are freely transferable to the members of the public. But in private companies, the shares are restricted. So if you are a member and you want to quit, you can just sell your shares to other members, but you can't sell the shares to the members of the public unless other members approves it. Tuko pamoja? Number 4, it prohibits any invitation. It prohibits any invitation. It prohibits any invitation to the public, to subscribe for its shares. To subscribe for its shares. i.e. it doesn't issue a prospectus. It doesn't issue a prospectus. i.e. it doesn't issue a prospectus. We shall see what is prospectus when we shall be doing topic 3 in company law. Number 5, it is not mandatory for these companies to publish its accounts. We said in public limited companies, they must publish annual accounts. But in private companies, it is optional for them to publish its annual accounts. So write and say, not mandatory, not mandatory, not mandatory to publish, not mandatory to publish its accounts. Not mandatory to publish its accounts. Then number six, write and say, required to have a company secretary. Required to have a company secretary. A company secretary. Required to have a company secretary if its share capital, if its share capital, if its share capital, if its share capital, if it has, sorry, if it has a share capital, if it has a share capital of 5 million. So if the company has a share capital of at least 5 million, it is required to have at least one company secretary. But for public companies, we said it is a must to have a company secretary. So for public companies, it is a must to have a public company secretary, but for private companies, it is a must to have a company secretary if the company has at least 5 million of its share capital. Write NB. A private company must include a private company must include the word limited, must include the word limited, must include the word limited, or in short form LTD, the word limited at the end of its name, at the end of its name. We said in public limited companies, a public company is required to include at the end of its name the word public limited company to show that this company is a public company. But in private companies, it must include the word limited to show that it is a private company. Are we together? Yeah. Wale mnaandika harakisheni. Okay, when we introduced, we said we have under registered companies, we have public company and private company. And under public company and private company, we have those companies that are unlimited companies and those who are limited. So we can say a public and private company may be classified under a public and private company, a public and private company, a public and private company may be classified under may be classified under, we have number one, companies limited by shares. Have companies limited by shares. Companies limited by shares. So let us see what are these companies. What are these companies who are limited by shares? Right, and say it refers to a company. It refers to a company. It refers to a company which the liability of its members is limited to the amount unpaid on the shares held by them, on the amount of shares held by them. Assuming you are one of the shareholder of a limited company that is shared, a limited company that is limited, of a public or a private company that is limited by shares, and you have acquired a share capital of, let us say, 100,000. Out of this 100,000 paid up capital, maybe you have paid, let's just say 80,000. So you have remained with 20,000 to complete the shares. Sindio? Then in case of bankruptcy or insolvency, it comes, okay, in case of solvency, you have remained with a balance of 20,000. So in this case, you shall be required by law to pay 20,000 to the creditor, but you shall not be, you are only limited to the paid and paid up capital, but your private properties shall not be interfered with. So these are companies that are limited by shares. So let us go to number 2. We have, yeah?
I have a shareholder. I have paid 80,000. Now the remainder of 100. Does it mean that the 80 what I'm supposed to pay on, like, the proper insolvency?
Okay, let us go to number 2. We have companies limited by guarantee. Companies limited by guarantee. Companies limited by guarantee. A company is limited by guarantee if a company is limited by guarantee if a company is limited by guarantee if, number 1, it does not have a share capital. Number one, it does not have a share capital. A company is limited by guarantee if, number one, it does not have a share capital. Number two, the liability of its members, the liability of its members, the liability of its members is limited by the company's articles, is limited. The liability of its members is limited by the company's articles to the assets of the company. Sorry, it is limited by the company's articles to the amount of members undertake, to the amount that members, to the amount that members undertake by those articles, by those articles to contribute to the assets of the company, to the assets of the company, to the assets of the company in the event of liquidation. In the event of liquidation. In the events of liquidation. So this point number 2 says the liability of its members is limited to the amount that members undertake by the articles to contribute to the assets of the company in the event of liquidation. So assuming you are a shareholder of this company, let us say you are a shareholder A and shareholder B. You are two shareholders. So this company that is limited by guarantee. So you say, in case of liquidation, you shall contribute up to 50,000 to the assets of this company to settle the debts of the company. Then the shareholder B says, in case of liquidation, I will contribute 70,000. So when the company liquidates, you shall be required by law to contribute up to 50,000 to the assets of the company to settle the debts. Yeah. So you shall not be required to contribute, you shall not be forced to contribute more than 50 and 70 respectively. Tunaelewana? Yeah. Let us go to point number 3. So we have said a company that is limited by guarantee. A company is limited by guarantee if, so these are conditions that will satisfy a company to be limited by guarantee. It will be limited by guarantee if it does not have a share capital. Number 2, the liability of its members is limited by the amount that members undertake by those articles to contribute to the assets of the company in the event of liquidation. And number 3, its certificate of incorporation, states that it is a company, limited by guarantee. It is a company limited by guarantee. Its certificate of incorporation states that it is a company that is limited by guarantee. That is limited by guarantee. So these are 3 conditions that must certify that a company must have to qualify to be a company that is limited by guarantee. Okay, let us go on. We said a public and private company may be classified under those who are limited by shares and those who are limited by guarantee. Then we have those who are unlimited companies. Unlimited companies. Let us write, these are companies where members, these are companies where members liability, where members liability is unlimited, where members of the company, where liability of the members of the company is unlimited. Unlimited means when in case of liquidation, and the company's assets is not sufficient to clear maybe let us say the liabilities, its liabilities, you as a shareholder, they may offend into your private properties. They might sell your private properties to come and settle the debts of the company. Sawa? Yeah. Okay, such companies, such members may lose their private assets, such members may lose their private assets in case the company is declared insolvent. In case the company is declared insolvent. In case the company is declared insolvent. Hello? Okay, let us see the difference between private and public companies. Next step is the difference between public company and private companies. Okay, number one, we said a public company, it has a minimum of 7 and no maximum. Then a private, it has a minimum of 1 and maximum of 50. So write and say, public company, it has a minimum of, this is public, and here is private company. So a public company, it has a minimum of 7 members, and no maximum. Then private companies, it has a minimum of 1, and a maximum of 50 members. So for a private company, it has a minimum of 1 and maximum of 50 members. Then number two, for a public company, it can issue a prospectus. You see, a prospectus is a document that advertises, that a company uses to advertise its shares when it wants to issue more shares. Then for a private company, cannot issue prospectus. It cannot issue the prospectus. It is not required by law to issue the prospectus. Then number 3, the third difference, a public company, it must have at least 2 directors. It must have at least 2 directors. Then for a private company, at least 1 director. Then number 4, for a public company, shares are freely transferable to the members of the public. So write and say, shares are freely transferable. But in private companies, restricts transfer of shares to the members only. So if you are a member of a private company and you want to quit this company, if you want to quit, it is either you sell to the other members of this company, or you seek permission. If you want to issue to other member who is not the member of this company, you must seek approval of the other members must approve before you sell your shares to the members of the public. So number 5 difference, the 5th difference, can only commence in public company. We said one of the features of a public company, apart from acquiring the certificate of incorporation, it must go ahead and acquire the certificate of trading before it commences its business. But a private company, just after acquiring the certificate of incorporation, it is allowed by law to start its business as they look for the certificate of trading. So that is another difference. So let us say, can only commence, it can only commence business. It can only commence business after the certificate of trading is issued. After the certificate of trading is issued. But in private companies, can commence business after the certificate of incorporation. The certificate of incorporation is issued. Then the last difference in public companies, it must publish its financial accounts, but in private companies, it is not a requirement to publish its financial accounts. So let us say it must publish its accounts. Then in private, it is not a requirement. It is not a requirement to publish. It is not a requirement to publish the accounts. It is not a requirement to publish the accounts. Andika haraka haraka tuendele. Any questions so far? Are we okay? Memaliza? Okay, let us see the difference between registered companies and statutory companies. We said, what is a statutory company? What is a statutory company? A statutory company, these are companies that were created by an act of parliament, but a registered company is incorporated under the provisions of Companies Act. Yeah? Sorry? Okay, in an exam situation, if you are not sure, usiwahi mention those acts. If you are not sure, ukikosa unaangushwa. Yes. Okay, let us see the difference between registered company. Difference between a registered company and statutory company and a statutory company. Let us create a T format. Here we have a registered company. And on the left side, on the right side, you have a statutory. Company. So the first difference, we have said a registered company, it is incorporated It is incorporated under the provisions, it is created, it is incorporated under the provisions of the Company Act. Then in statutory company, it is created, it is created by an act of Parliament. A statutory company, it is created by an act of Parliament. Then the second difference, a registered company, it is governed by directors. It is governed by directors. While the statutory company, it is owned by the government. It is owned by the government. It is owned by the government. We said examples of a statutory company. TASNET is an example of statutory companies. Those administrators, such as CEO and whatever, they are employed by the government to run those corporations. Sindio? But for a registered company, it is governed by directors, and those directors are chosen by, or they are elected by the shareholders during the annual general meeting. Then number 3, that difference can only engage in transactions, stipulated in memorandum and articles of association. It can only engage in transactions stipulated in memorandum and articles of association. But in statutory companies, can only engage in transactions, set by the statute. In statutory companies can only engage in transactions set by the statute. After this, let us see the difference between companies and a partnership. Maliza hii. Memaliza? The difference between a company and a partnership. So huku tuandike a company, then huku ni partnership. It is a legal person distinct from its members, while a partnership is not a legal person, is not a legal person, is not a legal person in the eyes of the law. A partnership is not a legal person in the eyes of the law. Okay, ni hivi, assuming you are person A and you have created person A and we have created A limited, have created A limited. In the eyes of the law, A and A limited, they are two different persons. But if you create a partner, okay, you, A and B, maybe you come into a partnership to operate a business, A and B, you and the business, you are just one. So if they sue in the eyes of the law, if they sue the partnership, they sue the partners. So they sue the partners, but in the company, they sue a company, but not a shareholder. Tunaelewana? Yeah. The second difference, membership. It has membership 1 to 50 members. Under membership, 1 to 50 members for a private company, and a minimum of 7, and no maximum for public companies. What are the minimum members of a partnership? A partnership, it has a minimum of 2 members. So let us say it requires a minimum of 2 members to 20 persons. For a partnership, it has a minimum of 2 to 20 partnerships. But those partnerships that engage in professional activities such as audit, medical operations, they are allowed to have at most 50 members. But a normal partnership, it has a maximum of 20 members. Okay. The third difference, a company, it is registered under Companies Act, under Company Act, where in partnership, a partnership is registered under Partnership Act. Registered under Partnership Act. The fourth difference, a company is managed by directors, right, and say managed by directors, while a partnership, it is managed by the partners. It is managed by the partners. It is managed by the partners. The fifth difference, a company is required to hold an AGM at least once per year. But a partnership, it is not a legal requirement to hold an AGM. Right, and say it is a legal requirement. It is a legal requirement to hold an AGM. But under partnership, it is not a legal It is not a legal requirement to hold an AGM. The sixth difference, a company, it has a perpetual succession, has a perpetual succession, while a partnership, a company, it has a perpetual succession, meaning death, insanity, or bankruptcy of one shareholder, it will not lead it to insolvency. But in partnership, death, insanity, or bankruptcy of one partner, it will lead it to bankruptcy. Sindio? So write and say death, bankruptcy, death, bankruptcy, or insanity can lead to dissolution of a partnership, Number seven, companies are limited by shares or guarantee. It can be limited by shares or guarantee, but in partnership, the partners have unlimited liabilities. Members liability is unlimited. Members' liability is unlimited. Members' liability is unlimited. Then in companies, it is a legal requirement for the companies to appoint an auditor, but it is not a legal requirement for a partnership to appoint an auditor. So the eighth difference, in companies, it must appoint an auditor. It must appoint an auditor to audit books of accounts, to audit books of accounts. But in partnership, it is not a legal requirement. It is not a legal requirement to appoint an auditor. Are you through? So we can say the features of a company or consequences of incorporation, it is the same as saying the advantages of the company, right? Features features of a company, features of a company, stroke, consequences of incorporation, consequences of incorporation, consequences of incorporation, stroke, advantages of a company, advantages of a company, advantages of a company. The first advantage or the first feature of a company or the first consequence of incorporation, we say it has a separate legal existence. Write and say separate legal existence. Separate legal existence. So what does it mean by saying a company has a separate legal existence? Write and say upon incorporation, a company becomes a separate legal entity, separate and distinct from its members, separate and distinct from its members. Refer to the story of Solomon versus Solomon and Co. Limited. Solomon and Co. Limited. The story of Solomon and Co. Limited. Solomon, this person, created a company called Solomon and Co. Limited. Then he owned the shares of up to 90 plus shares. Then he issued other shares to other people who were the members of the family. So when the company became insolvent, then the liabilities of other members, they were second. What this person did, he acquired the liabilities. For example, he borrowed the loan. Then in the event of liquidation, sasa ni yeye ndiye alikopesha company. Sumana Solomon ni yeye ndiye alikopesha Solomon and Co. Company. Sasa alikuwa liability among the liabilities and the shareholder at the same time. Sindio? So in case of liquidation, Solomon as a liability alilipwa first before the other members. Asa jamaa alienda akakopa pesa zenye ni more than the shares of ni more than the properties of this company. So in the event of liquidation, alitangulia akajilipa yeye as a partner, as a share, as a liability, as one of the liabilities. Then wengine, si the assets of the company ilisha. Asa wengine walienda hivyo. So other members, other shareholders, they went to court and argued that Solomon is a shareholder, but not a liability. But the court ruled that Solomon and Co. Limited, they are two different entities. They are two different entities in the eyes of the law. So number two, the capacity to own property. A company has a capacity to own property. capacity to own property. Write and say, upon incorporation of a company, it acquires the capacity, to own property. It acquires the capacity to own property such as e.g. land and buildings. Full stop. Continuation. The property is acquired. The property is acquired in the company's name. In the company name. For example, when you start a company, in the case of Solomon and Solomon Co. Limited, when this company acquires the property, it acquires in the name of Solomon and Co. Limited, but not as Solomon. Sawa. Mukiandikishana agreement, in the part of the seller or a buyer, it will say Solomon and Co. Limited, but not Solomon. Tunaelewana? Yeah. Number 3, contractual capacity. Contractual, it comes from the word contract. So let us write and say, a company contracts on its own name, company contracts on its own name through its agents, who are the agents of the company, the directors, through its agents known as the directors. Through its agents known as the directors. Full stop. Such contracts are binding on the company. Such contracts are binding on company itself, and not the directors. Such contracts are binding on a company itself and not the directors. Then let us go to number 4. Number 4, when a company is incorporated, it acquires the capacity to sue and be sued. So capacity to sue and be sued. Capacity to sue and be sued. Write and say, a company can sue. A company can sue and be sued. A company can sue and be sued in its own name, in its own name as a plaintiff or defendant, as a plaintiff or defendant, as a plaintiff or as a defendant. Number 5, perpetual succession. Perpetual succession. Perpetual succession. We said, what is the meaning of perpetual succession? We said bankruptcy, death, bankruptcy, or solvency of one shareholder will not lead to a company into insolvent. Right, and say a company, once a company is formed, once a company is formed, it continues to operate indefinitely until corporate insolvency. Meaning a company cannot die a natural death. Sawa. Continuation, death of a member does not affect continuity of a company. Death of a member cannot affect the continuity of the company. Number 6, a common seal. Once a company is formed, once a company is incorporated, it is given a common seal that it will be using to sign the important documents. So write and say, after the formation, it acquires a common seal. It acquires a common seal similar to a company's hand, similar to a company hand for signing important documents. E.g., in case of a school like this, it has a common seal for signing important documents such as certificates. Number 7, limited liability. Limited liability, write and say, members' liability to a company's debt. Members' liability to a company's debt. Members' liability to a company debt is limited to shares held by them. Is limited to shares held by them. Is limited to shares held by them, i.e., personal assets cannot be lost, i.e., personal assets cannot be lost. Personal assets cannot be lost. Personal assets cannot be lost in case of company, in case the company is declared insolvent. In case the company is declared insolvent. In case the company Number 8, we have said independent management. Okay, the shareholders yes. Ongeza sauti. Yes. Yes. Okay, so we have said those companies that are those companies who have limited liability, they cannot lose the private assets, since they can only lose the shares held by them, but not the private assets in case of insolvency. Sawa. Yeah. Okay, number 8, we say independent management. Independent management. Independent management means shareholders are not involved in management. Shareholders are not involved. Shareholders are not involved in management, in the management of a company. The shareholders are not involved in the management of a company, full stop. Management lies with the directors, but not the shareholders. Management lies with the directors, but not with the shareholders. So these are the advantages or features or consequences of incorporation. Sawa. Ukiulizwa, what are the advantages of incorporation? What are the features of the company or advantages? Just write these ones. Sawa. Yeah. Let us go to disadvantages of a company. Disadvantages of a company. Disadvantages of a company. Number 1, it is expensive. It is expensive. It is expensive. Right, and say registration of a company. Registration of a company. Registration of a company involves costs. Involves costs, including legal fees. Self-explanatory. Let us go to number 2, complicated procedures. Complicated procedures, right, and say a lot of procedures is involved. A lot of procedures is involved. A lot of procedures are involved. Information and running of the company. company. A lot of procedures is involved. Information and running of the company. Number 3, publicity. We can say publicity stroke lack of confidentiality. Lack of confidentiality. Lack of confidentiality. Right, and say a company is subject. A company is subject. A company is subject to undue publicity. To undue publicity. A company is subject to undue publicity, i.e., such documents must be delivered, right, and say, i.e., such documents must be delivered to the registrar. Such documents must be delivered to the registrar and are open to public scrutiny. Such documents must be delivered to the registrar and are open to public scrutiny. So tulisema, especially public limited companies, they must publish its annual accounts, sindio? Yeah. Sasa si wakipublish, si kila mtu atasoma. So in that way, they will lose the publicity. Number 4, high taxation. High taxation. High taxation. In Kenya, local companies, they are taxed at 30%, and foreign companies are taxed at 37.5%, of which the percentage is high as compared to individual partners that are taxed in partnerships. Sindio? So right and say companies. Right and say companies pay corporation tax. Pay corporation tax. Companies pay corporation tax at 30%. At 30% for local companies. For local companies. For local companies, and 37.5% for foreign companies. For foreign companies, which is relatively high. Which is relatively high as compared to an income tax paid by individual partners. Paid by individual partners. Sawa. Okay, number 5, participation in management. Number 5, write and say participation in management. Participation, number 5. Participation in management. Is this an advantage or a disadvantage? Imagine you are the owner of the business, but you are not involved in the running of the business. Is it an advantage or a disadvantage? Sini disadvantage, sindio? Yeah. Juu wale watu umepeana wakusaidie in the running of the management, that is directors, they might do things that benefits them, but not benefiting the shareholders. Sindio? Yeah. Right, and say shareholders other than shareholders other than those who are those shareholders other than those who are directors. Those who are directors are not involved in the day, are not involved in the day-to-day management of the company. Management of the company. Number 6, doctrine of ultra vires. Doctrine of ultra vires. Right, and say any act done beyond articles of association, done beyond articles of association is null and void. Is null and void. Any articles done beyond, any act done beyond articles of association is null and void, i.e. beyond powers. That is beyond the powers. Okay, right, and say there are two types of cooperation. There are two types of incorporations. There are two types of corporations. Mainly, we have two types of corporations. Namely, we have number 1 is corporation sole. We have a corporation sole. Then number 2, a corporation aggregate. Corporation aggregate. We have two types of corporations. Number 1, we have a corporation sole and a corporation aggregate. Okay, let us see what is a corporation sole. What is a corporation sole? What is a corporation sole? Right, and say this is a legally established office. This is a legally established. This is a legally established office. This is a legally established office, distinct from the owner, and can only be occupied by one person, and can only be occupied by one person. By one person. It can only be occupied by one person. After which, he is succeeded by another person. He is succeeded by another person. In other words, a corporation sole, this is an office that can only be occupied by one person. In Kenya, such offices includes the office of the president. In the office of the president, you can only have one president at a time. The office of the chief justice, the office of the attorney general, you can only have at least one at a go. Sawa. Okay. E.g., examples include the office of the president, the office of the president, the office of the president, the office of the chief justice, etc. Okay, let us see what are the features of a corporation sole. So write and say it has the following features. It has the following features. The features of a corporation sole. Number one, it is a legal person with a limited liability. Number one, it is a legal person. It is a legal person. It is a legal person with a limited liability. Number two, it can own property. It can own property. It can own property. Number three, it can enter into a contract. It can enter into a contract. It can enter into a contract. Number four, it has a perpetual succession. It has a perpetual succession. Then number five, it can sue or be sued. It can sue or be sued. It can sue or be sued. In short, in an exam situation, when you come across a question saying that write five or state five features of a corporation sole, na hauna content. And those features of a company, those features or advantages of a company, just state those. It is the same as features of a company. So we said features of a company, it is a legal person with a limited liability. Then it can own property, it can enter into a contract, it has a perpetual succession, and it can sue or be sued. So that is a corporation sole. Let us go to a corporation aggregate. Corporation aggregate. Corporation aggregate, this is a legal entity. Write and say, this is a legal entity. This is a legal entity formed by two or more persons, formed by 2 or more persons, formed by 2 or more persons for a lawful purpose, for a lawful purpose, for a lawful purpose. An example of a corporation aggregate ni kama the directors. See, we said directors of the company can be 2 or more. Sindio, you can have several offices of the directors of one company. For example, you can have 10 or more directors. Sindio. Okay, right, and say it has the following features. It has the following features. It has the following features. Number 1, it has independent legal existence. It has independent legal existence. It has independent legal existence with the limited liability. It has independent legal existence with legal liability. Number 2, it has a perpetual succession. It has a perpetual succession. It has a perpetual succession. Number 3, it has capacity to contract. It has a capacity to contract. It has a capacity to contract. Number 4, it can own property. It can own property. It can own property. Number 5, it can sue or be sued. It can sue or be sued. It can sue or be sued. Let us see the examples of these corporations. Write and say examples of corporation aggregate. Examples of corporation aggregate. Examples of a corporation aggregate. Number 1, we have chartered corporations. Chartered corporations. Number 2, we have statutory corporations. Statutory corporations. Number 3, we have registered corporations or registered companies. Number 3, we have registered corporations or companies. We have registered corporations or registered companies. The next class, we shall look at the other types of companies. So tulianza tukisema we have 5 broad categories of companies. That is chartered corporations, statutory corporations, registered companies. So we have remained with holding and subsidiary company and foreign companies. Sindio? Okay, have a blessed night and journey masses for those who will be traveling back home.